2023 has become the year where artificial intelligence has broke mainstream. Generative AI technologies are becoming increasingly pervasive, and tools such as GPT, Stable Diffusion, and more are putting it in the hands of everyone. No longer the domain of AI researchers and machine learning engineers, everyone can start using these technologies to their own ends. Naturally, this is something I have watched unfold, and I've been invited to comment on it in the press, both here in the UK, courtesy of the BBC, but for news outlets out in Europe as well. It's a complicated subject, as the issues of copyright and fair use, financial incentives and investment, workers' rights, and overall a need for better training and education has become a bigger and bigger talking point. However, for now, I wanted to focus on one of the biggest topics that impacted AI in the games industry in recent weeks: the actions by Steam's owners Valve to block new games using generative AI techniques, and what the significance of this motion is in the context of the games industry. I'm Tommy Thompson, this is AI in Games Plus, and this is a bit of a rant, to be honest with you. And that's not something I tend to do really, but yeah, let's get into why Valve's recent actions are arguably the most important step towards addressing how generative AI is going to be employed in the games industry, and actually why it's also a good thing. Let's start by quickly summarising what actually happened. In late June, news began to break across the likes of Reddit and social media sites that developers seeking to submit their games to Steam, the PC video game distribution platform, were being rejected on the basis of their AI content. A message sent to developers read as follows: "While we strive to ship most titles submitted to us, we cannot ship games for which the developer does not have all the necessary rights. After reviewing, we have identified intellectual property in, insert game name here, which appears to belong to one or more third parties. In particular, insert game name here contains art assets generated by artificial intelligence that appears to be relying on copyrighted material owned by third parties. As the legal ownership of such AI-generated art is unclear, we cannot ship your game while it contains these AI-generated assets, unless you can affirmatively confirm that you own the rights to all of the IP used in the dataset that trained the AI to create the assets in your game. We are failing your build, and we will give you one opportunity to remove all content that you do not have the rights to from your build. If you fail to remove all such content, we will not be able to ship your game on Steam, and this app will be banned." Now, speaking from experience, Steam enables for creators to upload games courtesy of their Steam Direct process. You pay a fee of $100, and this allows you to begin to add a new title for distribution on Steam. It's a fairly straightforward process, if a little time consuming. There's like a lot of forms to fill in, but once your game is ready, you can submit it, and once it's went through review and validation by Valve, which typically takes a couple of days, then you can start moving towards publishing the title and making it available for people to buy on Steam. And as explained in the introduction, several projects began to be rejected during the validation process, with the argument that the creator of the game could not prove ownership of all of the AI-generated assets in their game. After the news broke and gained traction, Valve later commented, stating that while they're open to titles using AI as part of their creative process, the need for creators to prove ownership was going to be a deal-breaker for titles being uploaded to the platform. So the big question you might be asking is, why is all this such a big deal? It's actually quite multifaceted, and as I stated already, it is, in my opinion, one of the most significant events that have happened in the industry for the use of AI technology, and specifically generative AI technology. In recent months, the conversation about how generative AI is going to be adopted in games has been loud and, frankly, often ill-informed. Hype merchants, market analysts, journalists, and many more have been telling us pretty frequently about how AI is going to change how we make video games. Though funnily enough, the people we're seldom hearing from are the developers themselves. Game studios and publishers have indicated that they're experimenting with the technology and looking to see how practical it is for their purposes. And as I have made clear both in my recent press comments but also in the likes of my Generative AI Explained episode of Artifacts on the main AI in Games channel, it's not as straightforward as many have indicated. There are a myriad of issues, be it with the technology underpinnings, the efficacy of this tech in the creative process, and of course the scrutiny it requires and how it impacts workers' rights, employability, and copyright law. What makes Valve's actions so significant is not in the context of them as a game developer or even as a game publisher, but rather as the owner of a major distribution platform. They are the first platform holder to take action against generative AI for games. This is significant for several reasons. First of all, they've set a precedent that other platform holders, be it Epic Games, Apple, Microsoft, Sony or Nintendo, may align with. Secondly, they've set a precedent that impedes growth of generative AI in the industry given the significance of Steam as a distribution platform. Third, they've curtailed arguably the easiest way for generative AI to flood the market in a less than positive way. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it is not just impeding growth of generative AI, it is protecting the industry and more critically Valve itself from the risks that generative AI has in its current form for the games industry. And it's worth my stating that not only do I see this being a significant development, but I also see it as a good one. Wearing both my AI and game developer hats, this is a positive step towards ensuring generative AI is employed practically, responsibly, and ethically within the industry. So let's unpack each of these points and why I think they're significant, and also help paint a picture for folks out there who are less familiar with game production and publishing as to the significance of it all. It's fair to say that Valve, as the owners of Steam, have a tremendous influence on the distribution of games on the PC platform. While there is the likes of itch.io, where a lot of smaller creatives post their content, as well as the likes of GOG or even the Epic Games Store for a lot of bigger titles, Steam is so entrenched in the PC gaming market that the success of a game on the platform is often heavily influenced by the ability to ship your game to that audience. When you see the likes of Hades explode on Steam after years of early access on the Epic Games Store, or more recently, Activision's admission that keeping games like Overwatch 2 and Call of Duty on Battle.net yielded little in terms of market share, it reaffirms how entrenched the player base is on Steam. By blocking generative AI submissions that don't adhere to their rules, they effectively block access to the largest market on the platform, and also one of the largest markets in games as a whole. But this is just the first step in understanding the significance of it all. Steam is, for many a small creator, the first step in a longer journey. You get your game shipped on PC, and then you move towards console and mobile platforms if and when you can. Now, speaking from experience, whether we're working on submitting games to the likes of Xbox, PlayStation or Nintendo, these storefronts have far stricter terms of service than Steam does. Steam games get a high-level check of the store page, the content presented, and a quick analysis of the game itself. Whereas on all the consoles you go through a far stricter process of submission, often referred to as lot check. This includes a much longer and more complex set of rules and regulations your game needs to adhere to, but also that they're thoroughly tested for game-breaking bugs that would prove detrimental to customers. In this instance, it's the rules and regulations that are the big deal. Steam, as I said, tends to be a bit more laissez-faire about submissions, whereas by comparison the console holders are far stricter. Console submission rules impact everything from game development tools and processes to user experience, in-game behavior and activity, in-game content, even the language being used to present information to users. Now, if Steam, the easiest main platform to ship on, turns around and says no to the bulk of generative AI submissions, I would bet my money that Microsoft, Nintendo and Sony will do something similar, at minimum copying Valve's stance. So not only has Valve set a precedent that others can follow, it then leads to my second point on impeding growth of generative AI in games. So yes, by making this change it limits the possibility of games not just making it to Steam, but also to other platforms, given they at minimum use the same rules as Steam. But it also prevents what has been, for me, the nightmare scenario, the flooding of Steam with shovelware and asset flips built using generative AI systems. Steam has a long history of being a nightmare marketplace for the sheer amount of crap that appears on it. People trying to make a quick buck will often try and publish shovelware to the platform, where they take a bunch of existing asset packs, slap it all together into a single playable build, call it a game, and then sell it. Some use a modicum of creativity to at least add something original, whereas others simply took the asset packs and shipped them as is. The worst offenders are the ones that ship a game, then create another that is markedly similar, make a few changes and ship it as a separate title. See the 99% of waifu card games on the platform. One person ships the same game 20 times but changes the questionable anime art in each game to squeeze more cash out of some horribly sexually frustrated man-child. Now imagine this idea but explode it in scale thanks to generative AI. As has been hyped again and again and again and again, you can build a myriad of art assets, code snippets, voice lines, textures and more through use of generative AI. Most of it isn't good enough for shipping in a commercial title or is rather generic and derivative, but you can produce it really bloody quickly. Content creators have highlighted how quickly you can throw a game together in a short period of time using generative AI tools. Some, like Sam Yam's video I highlighted in my Artifacts episode, did it for a laugh, but others are painfully sincere about it. And this is the nightmare fuel. As this is all rolled out, my nightmare has been that Steam Direct becomes so much worse than it currently is. Steam has hundreds of games released in a given day, and that's from people at least making an effort to asset flip themselves, to be the asset flippers. Now imagine you now had AI assistants to back that up. Instead of taking 1 week to slap together your shoddy game, you're making 2 or 3 a day? I mean, what would you call it? AI asset flips? AI flips? Flip.ai? AI flips? I don't know. Leave a comment and we'll workshop it. In any case, Steam's now blocked the vast majority of these submissions, given it's a requirement you have the ownership of all the original assets. This takes the wind out of the sails of most generative AI tools, be it ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, GitHub Copilot, or many more, given you can't prove ownership of the original assets. And, well, OpenAI and the like might advocate that they own their own training data or use open source assets, but that brings us to the final point. One of the unspoken things about all this generative AI hype is that the legal issues are being conveniently brushed aside a lot of the time. Companies invest millions in building platforms that are increasingly likely to have been established using copyright infringing datasets. There is legal action happening all over the tech sector in the US against OpenAI, Microsoft, GitHub, Stability AI, and many more, given they're accused of adding data to their training sets, be it images, text, code, or otherwise, without the permission of the original creators. Meanwhile, the copyrights law in the US and the EU at minimum preclude AI from earning copyright on generated assets. Now, I see a lot of hand-waving about all of this. It's just going to get figured out at some point. Sure, we'll invest $50 million in this wee project of yours. Thanks, investors. Will we turn a profit? Will we get sued into oblivion? It's kind of reliant on whether US copyright law changes, quite frankly, but, you know, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Now, this is the real reason Valve blocked the majority of generative AI submissions on the platform. It's a legal defense. As I stated in my recent Artifacts episode, there is real risk of legal ramifications, not just for the folks that create the original generative AI tools, but also anyone who uses them as well. And frankly, Valve doesn't want to get involved in that. You created a game that has generative art in it, and are now being sued by an artist who believes your assets violate their copyright. Well, if that game is on Steam, that drags Valve into it. Given my previous point about the market being flooded by generative ass flips, nah, keep working on it. If that kind of legal action became more pervasive, then Steam risks being included in dozens of legal challenges at any given time. That's not worth it for Valve, especially when you consider the money they make from these smaller games versus the big AAA publishers or even their own titles. By simply blocking generative AI that would fall under this criteria, it mitigates the legal risks. There is still the issue of whether or not a game on Steam actually has copyright given it used generative AI, but that's not a big issue for Valve itself at this time. Now, it's worth saying that this whole thing has turned into a straight-up mess, and a lot of people that frankly didn't know any better are getting caught in the crossfire. Given the intricacies of this new reality thanks to generative AI are not clearly communicated to the wider world, we have indie developers whose game is being banned from Steam given they might have used a few generated textures, or stuck a GPT plugin into their game without ever really thinking about the potential ramifications of their actions. While I was quick to condemn all the asset flippers out there, I recognise there are no doubt loads of other independent devs who simply tried using one of these to help them out in making their game. After all, that's how they've been advertised to you all, haven't they? I appreciate that's not fair on them, and given Valve is outright banning these games from being uploaded to Steam, I would hope that in the future there's some opportunity to re-evaluate the situation for these creators. But in the meantime, it's a warning shot for everyone else out there looking to ship their game to the platform. Avoid using generative AI tools at all costs unless you can prove ownership of the original training assets. I mean, I'm surprised myself that I'm advocating for Valve, a company that has frequently done the absolute bare minimum, and sometimes even less than that when it comes to the curation of content and the protections of its audience, only really intervening when it felt that it could make money from it. But as I say, I think they made the right call, and I'm actually quite impressed by that. Now, as always, I come across as a real cynic about generative AI for games, which is actually far from the truth. I think there is great potential for all this technology in the future, but the legal issues, the need for it to better fit production realities, and much more are going to continue to be a stumbling block. And Valve did the right thing to curtail it at this point, such that at least the legal aspect is brought to the fore once again, given we really don't want to be going down a situation where this is going to have such a hugely detrimental effect on the industry. Anyways, rant over. Thanks for listening to me right here on AI and Games Plus. I'm interested to hear what you think. Clearly, I've sided with Valve on this one, a first, believe you me. But if you disagree, by all means, let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more of this sort of thing here on AI and Games Plus, also let me know as well. This is a little bit of an experiment. I've done something a little bit different. I've came out from behind the video editing software and I'm actually camera facing here in a video, not something I tend to do very often. But alright, with that, let's wrap it up. Thanks for watching, take it easy folks, and I'll be back.